My name is Karen Dwyer. I am 42 years old enough to have learned that silence can sting harder than pride. After 20 years in this company, I have become the person people forget until the system breaks. Then they remember my name, briefly, like a password they never bothered to write down. That night, the lights in the top-floor conference room buzzed with exhaustion. Everyone wanted to go home, except Todd Harrison, the CEO's son, newly installed as vice president of product. He loved meetings that stretched past midnight, loved watching people squirm under the weight of his questions. He was talking about efficiency again, another round of cost-cutting that somehow always landed on the same shoulders. Mine. When I told him his proposal would disable the fallback nodes that kept our compliance servers alive, he smirked like a man rehearsing dominance. "Drop that attitude," he said, voice sharp and casual, "or forget about your bonus." The room went silent. No one looked at me. It was the kind of silence that says we agree with him but don't want to be seen agreeing. I could feel my pulse in my fingers. I stood, gathered my notebook, and smiled the smallest, calmest smile I could manage. "Yes, sir," I said. The second hand on the wall clock passed 12. I walked out before anyone exhaled. Behind me, Todd's laugh chased the door shut. In the hallway, I stopped for a moment, steadying my breath. $200,000, he had said, as if that number was my leash. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line, 11:59 p.m. Verbal notice received. The pen left a dent in the page. When I stepped into the parking lot, the rain had started soft, rhythmic, deliberate. I counted the drops against my windshield like a metronome, already hearing the hum of the servers in my mind, already knowing which heartbeat would go quiet first. By morning, they would learn what silence really sounds like. I drove home. For most of my career, I lived between code and silence. The company liked to call me reliable. That was their polite way of saying invisible. When I first joined, we were a small team working out of a rented floor downtown. The network crashed every other week, and payroll used to send paper checks because no one trusted the system. I fixed that. I built a scheduler that ran every process payroll, compliance, vendor syncs, global rollouts all tied to a single heartbeat, mine. Back then, people would stop by my desk with coffee and gratitude. "You saved us again. Karen," they'd say. I believed it mattered. I stayed late, wrote clean code, documented everything. Then the company grew, and the gratitude shrank. The scheduler stayed, but I became a rumor the woman who used to be important. When promotions came, they called me too technical for leadership. When things broke, they called me the only one who understands this mess. The same sentence, spoken in two different tones, depending on who needed me. Once, a young engineer named Miguel asked, "How does the scheduler know when to start?" I smiled and said, "It listens." He laughed, thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't. Every task, every line of code had my name buried inside it, a quiet signature, a trace of ownership no committee could erase. I started keeping a private log around that time. Not a diary. Not exactly. Just timestamps, code fragments, notes about decisions no one recorded. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I knew memory fails, and systems forget their makers. At meetings, I learned to nod when my work was renamed, to applaud when someone presented my diagram as their slide. It was easier that way, but invisibility, once learned, becomes armor. I stopped defending what was mine. I just built it stronger, layer after layer, until the system could stand without me. Or so they thought. When the lights flickered in my office that night, I looked up from the terminal and smiled. The heartbeat was still listening. Todd Harrison arrived with the kind of energy that fills a room before the person even opens their mouth. He was 35, freshly transferred from the East Coast branch, armed with an MBA, a new title, and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He introduced himself at the Monday all-hands meeting like a keynote speaker at his own celebration. "Change is good," he said, pacing. "We're here to modernize, streamline, and leave old habits behind." His eyes landed on me when he said old habits. Afterward, in the corridor, he caught me by the coffee machine. "Karen." "Right," he asked. "You've been here since. Forever. Almost 20 years, I said. He smiled, the kind that isn't meant to reach you. "That's admirable. But legacy systems tend to outlive their usefulness. We're moving everything to a real automation suite soon. Something scalable." I stirred my coffee. "The current system already scales." "Sure," he said, patting my shoulder. "But we need something with visibility." Visibility. That word again. The kind used by people who measure competence by how loud it sounds in a meeting. A week later, he replaced the head of infrastructure, a quiet man who respected my work, with one of his own recruits from business school. The new structure cut half the maintenance budget and demanded full documentation of all existing code. In a team call, Todd turned to me. "Karen, you'll start documenting your processes this week. Hand over everything by end of quarter so we can move on from legacy dependencies." I met his gaze through the screen. "Of course." "Good," he said, relaxing back in his chair. "I know this stuff can be emotional for long-timers." I muted my microphone before exhaling. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it, "Ownership Export Internal Use Only." Every file, every key, every credential tied to my name went inside. By the time he finished his sentence about innovation, I had already begun writing the quiet history he would never read. When I got home, it was a little past midnight. The apartment in Ballard was quiet except for the hum of my old desktop, the same one I had used since the company's first expansion. I didn't change my clothes. I didn't pour a drink. I just sat down and signed in. The internal registry flickered to life. Lines of text scrolled, slow and steady. The same structure I had built 12 years ago, still running, still mine. I typed my credentials and waited. The access tree unfolded like a map no one else remembered how to read. There it was, scheduler core, owner K, Dwyer, successor none, oversight none. I leaned back, exhaling through my teeth. Not surprise, just confirmation. Todd had assumed someone else had taken control years ago. He never asked. They never do. The door creaked. My neighbor, a single father who worked night shifts, knocked lightly before leaving a paper bag outside his leftover takeout, his quiet way of making sure I ate. I whispered thanks through the door and went back to the screen. I opened my notebook. One clean line, ownership confirmed. Heartbeat integrity active. Then another protocol chain intact. No external dependencies. No anger, no satisfaction, just precision. I checked the logs again, every major process still tied to my master key, every backup still under my encryption. I remembered writing those lines of code in an empty office, years before Todd's father became CEO, when no one believed a single scheduler could run an empire. Now that empire balanced on credentials typed from my living room. I backed up the data to an encrypted drive labeled Notebox. The lights from the terminal pulsed against my notebook. I closed it, steady. They wanted visibility, and now they had it if they knew where to look. I shut down the monitor. The hum faded until there was only my heartbeat. Steady and slow. The system slept. So did the city. By morning, both would wake differently. At 7:59 that morning, the system finally spoke. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, coffee warm in my hands, when my phone started buzzing nonstop, not messages alerts. Every server I once watched over was crying out at once, the same red banner echoing across departments. Access denied, owner not recognized. Inside the office, someone must have stood up first. I could picture the reaction like muscle memory. The payroll coordinator calling it, finance shouting down the hallway, compliance checking their inboxes and finding empty exports where automated reports should have been. Then, The message that would start the panic legal to all teams. Has anyone seen Karen Dwyer? They would search Slack next. My status hadn't changed in 12 hours. Offline recharge mode. The smiling emoji I'd left there weeks ago suddenly looked like prophecy. The first call came from Miguel, the young engineer who had once asked how the scheduler knew when to start. His voice was tight. "Karen, something's wrong. The dashboards aren't loading." "They are," I said quietly. "Just not for you." He hesitated. "Did you do something?" I maintained the system exactly as designed. I said, "If ownership isn't verified." The scheduler pauses. "That's safety, not sabotage." "People are freaking out," he said. "Todd's in legal's office." "He said I know what he said." I interrupted. "And I know what I built." He was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You're calm, because it's working." I replied. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. Across town, the building would now be lit up like a storm. Monitors flashing, voices rising, meetings forming out of thin air. The machine they took for granted had stopped breathing, just long enough to remind them who gave it lungs. I took another sip of coffee. Steady and slow. The morning rush outside my window carried on as if nothing had changed. Inside, an empire held its breath. By 8:30, the company was in full lockdown mode. I could tell by the number of secure notifications pinging through the encrypted backup I still had access to panic disguised as procedure. Jorge from IT was probably the first to dig deep enough. He'd been there for almost as long as I had, one of the few who still understood the skeleton of my design. I imagined him running trace commands, trying to find where the permissions failed. Every path would lead to the same place: my name. At 8:42, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. "Legal department. Please respond immediately." I didn't. Across town, they were pulling every access log they could find. Finance reported stalled transactions. Compliance noted missing data exports. HR, always the last to understand, sent a draft memo titled "Performance Concern Failure to Transition Key Assets." I didn't need to see it to know the tone polite disbelief wrapped around corporate threat. Then, the first voice recording surfaced from the conference bridge. A lawyer muttered, "Every failed command traces back to Dwyer's credentials." "She shut it down," Todd demanded. "No," Jorge said quietly. "Look at the logs. No deletions, no edits, no tampering. It's running as written." "What do you mean, as written?" Jorge scrolled, then froze. My note from 6 years earlier glowed on the projector screen. "If this still points to me, no one did their job. Good luck." Someone laughed, nervous, sharp. The lawyer exhaled. "She warned us." Todd's voice cracked. "Get her on the phone. She's not answering." HR said, "Then lock her out." He snapped. "Technically, we can't," Jorge said. "She still holds the primary credential." For a moment, silence filled the line. I could almost hear it from my apartment, the sound of hierarchy collapsing under its own weight. I closed my laptop and wrote another line in my notebook, "Audit complete." Integrity verified. Reaction predictable. The system didn't need defending. The truth was already speaking, line by line. By 9:15, the building was still burning quietly, emails flying faster than solutions. I hadn't answered a single call. Instead, I opened a blank message and began to type. "Subject restoration agreement offer valid until noon." I wrote it like I wrote code, simple, exact, no emotion. "To restore the scheduler and resume operations, the following conditions must be met. 1. The full performance bonus previously threatened, $200,000, reinstated immediately. 2. A formal written apology signed by executive leadership acknowledging hostile conduct and mismanagement. 3. A limited consulting engagement, 6 months, $1.3 million paid up front, no non-compete clause. 4. Upon completion, I will personally revoke all remaining credentials tied to my name." I read it twice, then attached my credentials file encrypted, untouchable without me, and hit send to legal, copying the board. Minutes later, my phone rang. It was Miguel. "Karen, what did you just do? They're freaking out." I gave them a choice. I said, "They're calling it extortion. They can call it whatever helps them sleep." I could hear the noise behind him, voices arguing, chairs scraping, a printer whirring like panic. Through the conference mic, a board member's voice cut in, clipped and cold. "Suspend Todd Harrison pending review. Effective immediately." Someone protested. "He's the CEO's son." Another voice replied. "He's also the reason we're offline," Miguel whispered. "They're scared. They should be," I said softly. "They built their success on something they never owned." He hesitated. "Are you coming back?" "I never left." I told him. "I'm just not invisible anymore." After the call, I poured another cup of coffee and stared at the clock on the stove. The second hand moved slow, steady. My inbox filled with auto replies, read receipts, escalating subject lines. Then one message appeared at the top. "From General Counsel. We've received your offer. The board is convening." I closed the laptop and leaned back, calm. They would decide soon enough how much silence was worth. By 10:30, the company had turned into a war room. My inbox pulsed with new subject lines every few minutes. Urgent contract review, immediate response required, final wording approval. They were negotiating with themselves now, trying to sound in control. At 11:15, a message from legal arrived, preliminary acceptance pending board approval. Please stand by for execution copy. I set the phone beside my mug and watched the steam fade. They had finally realized what this was never about revenge or ransom. It was a transaction. At 11:42, Miguel called again. They're all in one room. Legal, finance, the interim COO. Todd's gone. Suspended, I asked, officially on leave. Unofficially. He's not coming back. Through the speaker, I could hear voices overlapping, the sound of people reading from papers they didn't write. The board's voting now. Miguel whispered. They're signing everything. Even the apology letter. Good, I said. Make sure they send the final signature log. At 11:58, it arrived. A digital packet of files, all properly signed and time-stamped. The last signature came from the COO, 11:59 and 47 seconds. I opened my laptop. The terminal greeted me like an old friend. 1 login, 3 commands, heartbeat restored. The screens across the city must have shifted at once. Dashboards refreshing, payroll resuming, data exports humming back to life. The system inhaled. My phone buzzed again. Message after message. Thank you. We're back online. Karen, you saved us. I didn't reply. My cursor blinked in the terminal, waiting for the final instruction. I typed the closing command and paused, fingers resting on the keys. The system was steady again, balanced, obedient. No applause, no chaos. Just quiet precision the way I had built it to be. I logged out. The hum softened. My reflection caught in the dark screen looked calm, almost detached. Outside, a clock somewhere struck 12. The next morning, I arrived before anyone else. The building felt quieter than I remembered, like the network itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. My credentials still worked. Security nodded as I walked in, eyes careful, unsure whether to smile or salute. I went straight to the server room, signed in one last time, and began deleting my access keys. Each confirmation window blinked, asking the same question, "Are you sure?" Yes, I was sure. When the last file cleared, I opened the console and left one final message in the code. You don't need me anymore. Just learn to be better stewards. The words looked strange on the black screen, too human to belong there, too calm to be revenge. I saved the file and closed the terminal. On the top floor, the executive corridor was half lit, stripped of its usual noise. The glass walls reflected an empty kind of success. Todd's office door was open, the nameplate already gone. Inside, the desk was bare except for a lone chair pushed neatly against the window. The new chief technology officer, a man I'd seen only in meetings, was waiting near the elevator. He looked barely 30, dressed too formally for a day like this. "Ms. Dwyer," he said. His voice carried more hesitation than authority. "I just wanted to say, what you did, it was extraordinary. What I did was overdue," I replied. He nodded, lowering his eyes as I passed. No handshake, no performance, just acknowledgement. I walked down the corridor slowly, the echo of my footsteps the only applause I would ever need. At the elevator, Miguel appeared from the stairwell, clutching a folder. "They asked if you'd stay on longer," he said. I smiled. "They already have everything they need." He looked down, then back up. "It's different without you. It should be," I said. "That's the point." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside and pressed the ground floor. As the doors closed, I saw my reflection between the panels steady, unshaken, finished. The rain had returned by dawn, soft and steady over Ballard's rooftops. I left my apartment without my laptop, without even checking the company's messages. The world felt lighter that way. On the street, the city was already awake, ferries cutting across the water, buses sighing at red lights, the usual rhythm of people moving forward. I matched their pace, slow but certain. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, then again, insistent. I didn't look. It could wait. For years I had answered every ping, every alert, every call that began with the word urgent. This one could die unanswered. A cafe near the pier had just opened. The barista smiled when I walked in, unaware she was handing coffee to the woman who had made half the city's payroll run again that morning. I took the cup and sat by the window, watching the rain blur everything into a single calm surface. Somewhere downtown, Todd Harrison was probably packing a box. His father's lawyers would write statements about accountability, learning, and moving forward. The system was healthy again. Heartbeat restored, reports clean, deadlines intact. None of them would ever fully understand that I hadn't broken anything. I had just let the truth operate without me. I turned my phone over on the table, the screen dark. My reflection stared back older, sharper around the eyes but steady. The same woman who'd once believed that loyalty guaranteed safety. In the distance, a fairy horn echoed through the drizzle. I thought of Todd's last words to me in that sterile conference room. "Drop that attitude or forget about your bonus." I smiled faintly, lifting the cup to my lips. I did. I murmured. I dropped his entire system instead. The sound of the city rose around me, engines, rain, conversation life rebuilding itself one heartbeat at a time. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket, still off, and stepped outside into the gray light. For the first time in years, I didn't have to keep the system running. It could finally run on its own.